I am the founder of Prenuptials.com, and I write prenups that help couples stay married. You can't have the conversation about prenuptial agreements without kind of acknowledging the stigma and the bad reputation that they have. I think a lot of people, myself included, before I started practicing family law, look at prenups as you're planning for divorce before the relationship even starts. And some of the reputation is deserved. They have been used poorly in the past. They've been used to kind of codify a disparity in wealth between spouses. And I'm sure some couples, have used them as kind of like a pre-plan for divorce. But, a prenup is a contract like any other contract. And you can put good terms in it. You can put bad terms in it. And a prenup can be something that supports your marriage and helps it run smoothly, or it can be a big red flag depending on what you write into it.
Thriving in Tandem. It's a podcast for you, the married entrepreneur that wants to win in business and marriage at the same time.
Welcome to Thriving in Tandem.
All right, so here we are with Aaron Thomas. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be fun, right, honey?
Yes, we're going to learn a lot today.
Because I remember when I first met you, and then I told Kaylee about you and what you did, she kind of had this look. Like, what?
I'm like, it's kind of late now. I guess you could still get a prenup even though we're married. But I'm like, it's kind of late now, honey.
Talk about what he did, not about what we should do. But really excited to kind of dig into this, because this definitely is a different take on how people think about prenuptial agreements, because we typically think of it as kind of that safe out. And so a lot of people think, once you get a prenuptial agreement, you're just already focused on leaving the couple, or you make it easy to leave and get divorced. But you have a different take on this. So why don't you go ahead and share, what is it that you do, and how did you get here?
Yeah. I am the founder of Prenuptials.com, and I write prenups that help couples stay married. You can't have the conversation about prenuptial agreements without kind of acknowledging the stigma and the bad reputation that they have. I think a lot of people, myself included, before I started practicing family law, look at prenups as you're planning for divorce before the relationship even starts. Or if you ask somebody to picture what they think about when they hear about a prenup, they immediately think about one rich spouse trying to keep their money from their, gold digging fiance, or, something along those lines. Some of the reputation is deserved. They have been used poorly in the past. They've been used to kind of, codify a disparity in wealth between spouses. And I'm sure some couples, have used them as kind of like a pre-plan for divorce. But a prenup is a contract like any other contract, and you can put good terms in it. You can put bad terms in it. And a prenup can be something that supports your marriage and helps it run smoothly, or it can be a big red flag depending on what you write into it. I define a prenup as a set of rules that defines, each spouse's rights and responsibilities, both during the marriage and, if necessary, after. And even just explaining that tends to raise some eyebrows, because most people think all you're doing is writing in, what happens if the marriage ends. I like to think of it as a partnership agreement for your marriage. If you, as you all know, if you go into business with someone, you're likely to want to put on paper, how things are going to work. What are your rights and responsibilities? Who owns what portion of the business? What are your expectations? And yes, every good partnership agreement is going to have a clause that says what happens if the business, if a partner leaves the business, or if it comes to a close. But that's not the purpose of the partnership agreement. The purpose of the partnership agreement is to keep the business running smoothly and make sure everybody is aligned and on the same page. And I think that's how couples should approach prenuptial agreements.
Yeah, it almost sounds like it's putting in the details of when you give your vows. When in a marriage vows, there's all these, for better for worse kind of thing, but it's almost like you're putting in the details of how you treat each other. What would you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think couples often do talk about what their expectations are from the relationship standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, what their expectations are in terms of what the family is going to look like. But the financial aspect of it is often overlooked. In my experience, couples spend more time debating the guest list than they do how they're going to set up their finances during the marriage. And as somebody who worked as a family law attorney for years and years and litigated over 1,000 divorces during my career, I've seen that not getting on the same page in terms of what your expectations are for your financial relationship can lead to some really horrible outcomes. Also, that these kinds of misunderstandings are really avoidable in many cases by getting on the same page at the beginning of the marriage.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're kind of alluding to it, but why don't you go ahead and explain, how did you get into this niche? Because it sounds like you're a family law attorney first, and now you're kind of really digging into helping people on the front end of marriage as opposed to the back end of marriage.
Yeah. I definitely have tried to make the switch to preventative medicine, so to speak. I got recruited into family law. I was a lawyer who had some experience in the courtroom, and a friend of mine's wife worked for a family law firm, which is just a nice way of saying divorce lawyer, and recruited me to come in there. And I went there, and they were going to help me pay off my student loans, and I accepted the job. And I was someone who my parents just celebrated their 57th anniversary.
Wow.
Before I practiced family law, I was about 30 years old. Most of my friends had never even been married, much less divorced. I didn't really know anyone closely that had been through a divorce. I was still friendly with most of my exes at the time, and then I'm thrust into this world of really the most acrimonious divorces you can imagine. And I really had no idea what it entailed. I thought, if things don't work out, you split everything 50-50 and you go on your way. And, I had a vague concept that you keep what you had at the beginning of the marriage and you split what you had, during the marriage. But if it were that simple, divorce lawyers wouldn't be in business, right? What I've learned is that the average divorce case takes over a year, costs the average couple $30,000 in attorney's fees, and is really just one of the toughest experiences that someone can go through. I mean, obviously we think about divorce being the end of a relationship that you thought was going to last forever. And that by itself is absolutely, devastating and heartbreaking enough. But I think what a lot of people don't recognize is how painful the divorce case itself is, the actual legal case, the litigation, because everything that is private is all of a sudden put into a public courtroom where anybody can come in and witness, and people are weirdly incentivized to sling mud at each other to try to get a leg up in terms of, who walks away with the majority of the finances, what happens to your children. And I was having the same conversation over and over with people who came in my office where they say, what do you mean she wants half of my retirement that I worked so hard for? What do you mean he wants half of the equity in the house where I paid the mortgage, throughout the marriage? And it struck me that the misalignment with marital finances wasn't something that just arose at the end of the marriage. That was a failure for people to get on the same page at the beginning of their relationships. And so, going to how I got into it, my original advice to friends and family was don't get married because it's a legal relationship that you don't know what you're getting into, and people, there's just such bad consequences that maybe you should throw a party and, live together and change your last name if that's your thing, but don't actually go through with like the legal act of getting married where you go to the courthouse and you sign the certificate. But obviously I'm now happily married and my views changed over the years. And when my wife and I started talking about having a family and getting married and what we wanted that to look like, I wanted so badly to avoid the pitfalls that I saw my clients experience over the years. And my wife is also a lawyer, and we sat down and said, how can we avoid, all of the most common mistakes that we've seen break up people's marriages? And we started coming up with kind of like a list of rules that we wanted to have for our relationship. For example, not having fights over the money. So we sat down and decided, what's mine, what's yours, what's ours? How are we going to set up our bank accounts? Does all the money go into a joint account, or does it go into separate accounts and then we contribute to a joint account? And things like counseling. I saw so many of my clients have arguments about one spouse would want to go to counseling and the other one wouldn't want to go to counseling, and then that second one would come around to the idea, and the first one had given up on the idea. And so we decided, we're going to, if either of us wants to go to counseling, we're going to go to counseling. And we put all of these things into an agreement, into a prenuptial agreement. And once friends and other people started hearing that this is what we did, people were like, you've got to tell other people that this exists, because most people think that a prenup is literally just how do you split things up when you get divorced, rather than how can you prevent a divorce by getting on the same page and avoiding the things that break couples up.
Wow, this is good, because we did a pre-counseling before we got engaged and married, and we talked about a lot of this stuff. We don't have a contract, but we talked about a lot of the stuff that you do contracts for. So this is great.
So it's kind of like you're almost like a marriage counselor, your premarital counseling, because obviously it's before they get married. So have you seen couples change? Well, first, when they come to you because they want to get a prenuptial agreement, obviously they're coming in with one mindset of what they're going to do. But then as you counsel them, how does this change their perspective?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. I mean, it's a perfect question. Couples that come in, the first thing that I lay out is that for your prenup to be enforceable in any of the 50 states, in the United States, both spouses have to disclose all of their assets and debts and income to each other. And for some couples, that is the first time that they have exposed that information to each other, right? And so, and the way that we ensure that this happens is we literally put it down on paper. We create a net worth statement for each spouse, and we attach it to the back of the agreement. And I've, had people come in and say, well, tell me about your financial situation. Is there a big disparity in your incomes? And one spouse says yes, and the other says no at the same time. and that's a sign that maybe they haven't discussed these things as much as needed, right? I don't blame them. I'm not judging, people in this situation, because, not everyone is as open about finances. A lot of us grow up in a society where talking about money is taboo. It's uncomfortable. And you start dating someone and you're trying to put your best foot forward, and you don't admit your student loan balance or your credit card balance on the first date. And then it snowballs from there. And all of a sudden you're in a relationship 2-3 years down the line. You're talking about getting married, and you have these financial skeletons in your closet that haven't been disclosed. And so, the first step is transparency. That is, it struck me when I was kind of developing this philosophy that the same principles that apply to what I think is a good prenup also apply to a good marriage. So the first is transparency. The second is communication, and the third is fairness. And so that is the first step, is putting your money out there. And then the second is, along the lines of communication, is how are you going to set up your finances? Are you going to have, one joint account? Are you going to have separate accounts? I encourage a lot of couples to have at least kind of 3 sets of accounts. So obviously every couple is different. If something is working for you, don't break what isn't broken. But a lot of couples in today's day and age, they're older. They've been living on their own. They've had their own finances for a certain period of time, and it seems natural for them to keep separate bank accounts. And in my view, that is a recipe for secrecy. It discourages the kind of communication that I think couples should have. And so I think the couple should set up at least one joint bank account and decide what are your joint expenses, and make sure that those things come out of the joint bank account. So, and there's a couple different ways the couples will do it. They'll do what I call the outside-in plan, where their income goes into their separate bank accounts and they contribute to a joint account. Or they'll do what I call the inside-out plan, where their money goes into a joint account and they each kind of get like maybe a little allowance that goes into their separate accounts. There's got to be communication about the finances. You've got to know what the income is in the household. You've got to know what the expenses are. Getting aligned on what your shared goals are is really important. And so we go through a lot of these steps during the process of actually preparing the prenuptial agreement.
Well, and getting on a budget is huge too. Because you never know. A lot of times we marry someone opposite. One's a spender and one's a saver. And, that can cause friction right there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, when it comes to budgeting, there's a principle that I call the annual shareholders meeting. As you all know, there are some crossovers in principles that work in business and in marriage. And I will encourage couples to set an agenda and a specific time. In my household, we have a repeating event on the calendar every December 1st. We sit down and we have an agenda of the things that we're going to share with each other. We have written into our agreement that we're going to have ongoing communication and transparency about our finances. So at this meeting, we sit down and we update each other on, the balances of all the accounts, all the incomes, all the debts. We do a look back at the last year and say, okay, what did our spending look like? Were there any big surprises? Did we spend more in a certain category than we meant to? Did we spend, underspend in a certain category? Does our spending match our values, right? And then have a set time to check in and make sure that everything is still working from a financial standpoint. One thing I've learned is two spouses living in the same household, but in different socioeconomic brackets, because how they've set up their finances is a recipe for disaster. It is not going to work. And so making sure that you have set times to sit down and make sure that everything is working. And then also kind of do a look forward and say, all right, what are our big goals for this next year? Is this a year that we buy a new house, or do we want to take a big trip? Do we need to save for a baby fund, or, the new car fund, that kind of thing, and have a time where the couple can talk about these things. And we literally write this into the prenup, the annual meeting and the agenda that they're going to have for it. So I think tools that encourage ongoing communication are also huge for a couple who's married, whether they're getting a prenup or not.
Yeah. So besides the finances, what are some common issues that you found with your clients?
I think that, once we started offering counseling provisions for agreements, for prenuptial agreements, that's been something that's been hugely popular with my clients, that they love seeing. Obviously we can't predict everything that they may argue about over the course of their marriage, but if we create the environment and the structure where they have the ability to address these things with, a counselor or a professional. Robert, you said that it sounds like I might do a little bit of counseling. It might be in my blood. My dad taught counseling at the university level for over 40 years, and my sister is a therapist as well. So I may have gotten it honestly, but I'm a big fan of, providing the opportunity to talk things out with a third party, super helpful. And so my wife and I have a rule in our prenup that says if either of us wants to go to counseling, either of us can trigger this provision where we go to 3 counseling sessions per year. There's no debate about it. There's no, do we need it? Do we not need it? And before either of us could move to try to dissolve the relationship, we'd have to do 6 counseling sessions. Some of my clients, they make that 12. But kind of creating these steps to actually make it more difficult to end up in a divorce courtroom rather than easier is something that I think my clients think is a good thing, because when people are getting married, they don't want to break up.
Right.
Even people who get a prenup, they want their relationship to be successful. And they just want to put the kinds of protections in that certainly would avoid a messy divorce if it happens, but I think the greater goal is to avoid divorce altogether. Having something where if you want to go to counseling, you're going to go, has been a positive.
Yeah, because, obviously if you're getting married, you're definitely not wanting to get divorced, and this is the best of times, and so this is the best time to kind of talk about these things. And I think most people just don't know, they don't know what they don't know. And so I think the guidance of how to have a successful marriage, I think, is the key thing, and then putting it in writing. And so do you have a set of guidelines that you go through, or do you just kind of go based on the lead of the client, or just kind of combination of the two?
Yeah, some clients, they know what they want coming in, but I try to give everyone that meets with me kind of a menu of options, different things that help. Kaylee, you mentioned, what happens when one spouse is a saver and the other one is a spender. Having the money go into a joint account, but each spouse get kind of an allotment or an allowance that they can spend on their own without kind of any approval has been something that a lot of couples have found to be a positive. Because, for example, my wife and I, we have a rule that neither one of us can spend more than $500 from the joint bank account without approval from the other one. And in practice, it's actually ended up, we probably discuss anything over $200 because we have worked this habit of discussing things with each other, that discussing things that impact the other spouse. We've worked this habit into our relationship. Something that is under, $200, we kind of trust each other, and then we both have our kind of allowances, if you will, that we can spend, on our own. But that way, we're limited in the damage we can do to the joint account, and we have this, mutual respect of saying, hey, we're going to discuss things, and it may be money or it may be something else, but we are exercising the habit of communicating about things that impact our spouse. It can be money, but it can also be other things.
And so how, you've got this contract, we got this prenuptial agreement, here's the things we agreed to, but when push comes to shove, and then sometimes you're upset about something and someone wants to go to counseling, and it's supposed to be it's supposed to be, we've agreed to this, but one still drags their feet. I mean, have you had those circumstances where maybe the couple comes back to you and says, hey, he's not fulfilling his end of the bargain, or maybe you and your wife, has there been issues where you're like, I know it's an agreement, but I'm not doing this, or whatever?
Yeah, no, that is a great question, because often that's what we think about is how do you actually enforce this? Am I dragging my spouse to court if they went wild at Target on the credit card? And I think that enforcement is only one part of the formula. The other two parts, I believe, are awareness and commitment. A lot of couples, because they never set any kind of guidelines or any rules at the beginning of the relationship, if one spouse doesn't want to go to counseling, it's like, okay, my spouse will go to counseling, and they may not be happy about it, but it's not like they are violating something that they agreed to at the beginning of the relationship. And then, commitment is the other part of it, because you're putting it in writing, you're putting your signature next to it, and people want to be good to their word. And so when somebody is not doing what they said they were going to do, you've at least got something to point to say, hey, we agreed on this ahead of time. I liken it to another thing that we do that may not be enforceable, but is a commitment we make, and that's our wedding vows. If somebody violates their wedding vows, you can't take them to court over it, but it is something that we take very seriously because we have stood up and committed to it in front of other people. And I think making it, putting a ceremony around it, whether that's standing in front of your friends and family or putting your signature on a piece of paper, saying what you're going to live up to, makes people want to stay true to their word, and it gives people something to look back on and say, this is what we committed to, this is what we agreed to do, and rather than it just be something that you complain about and you don't really know, am I being overbearing, maybe we don't need counseling. You have something to point to say, this was the agreement, this is the rules that we put forth for our relationship, and I want to stick to it.
Yeah. So any surprises, like what are some of the agreements that have been made and just surprised you, caught you off guard, or I didn't see that one coming?
Yeah. I mean, I've had a number of scenarios of things that have come up that have surprised me, and for example, I had someone come to me and say, well, I can't disclose all my assets and debts. Then my spouse would know of it. I can't let that know. I can't let them know what I've got.
Oh my gosh.
And that is a big sign that, maybe you are not ready for this relationship called marriage. So there's been awakening points like that. I've had people come and say, I want to have a rule about how much weight you can gain over the course of the marriage.
Oh my
And,
gosh.
one, the judge is not going to enforce that. But two, I'm just a big fan of shining a light into those shadows. And if you have the kind of spouse who, wants you to contractually agree to not gain over a certain amount of weight, that's something you should probably know on the front end of the relationship before things
Oh my
get
gosh.
started. So
You gained 5 pounds. This isn't going to work out.
Yep, sorry, you're out of here.
They got to get on the scale once a week.
Yeah, what about if it's a woman, like she gets pregnant? Like, is there like allowances
right,
for that?
an allotment, how many pounds over, So it is interesting, but I am just a believer that if you have expectations for your marriage, they are better. It's better to put them out there and have them be spoken rather than what I think way too many couples do is they go in with these assumptions about what the relationship's going to look like, about what their expectations are that are never voiced. And then years down the road, they're in this situation where, like I said, somebody comes and says, what do you mean they want half of my retirement? Well, when you got married, did you expect that you were building all of this together and everything, all your finances were jointly owned? Or did you truly believe that what was, the accounts that were just in your name and your 401k belonged to you? And if the relationship came to an end, that they would walk away penniless? And if that's someone's belief, you should know that your spouse thinks that before you go in, rather than you go in assuming that you're building an empire together and your spouse believes that it's every spouse for themselves. So, these conversations, are they the most romantic all the time? Maybe not. Are they difficult sometimes? Yes. But I think that is, having these open communications is long-term going to be good for the relationship because it helps you identify where the misunderstandings are and address them.
Yeah. So how long have you been focused on these prenuptial agreements?
I started building this niche about 7 years ago. And just in 2022, went full-time, took the leap. I do not litigate divorce cases anymore. And this is what I do 100% of the time. Like I said, I am trying to take the lessons that I learned from 1,000+ divorce cases and use that knowledge to try to help couples reverse engineer a successful relationship.
So how often have people, or maybe it hasn't happened, come to you for a prenuptial and then they don't end up getting married because they find out all the stuff about each other that they probably didn't already know, and then they're like, you know what, maybe I need to rethink this?
It is rare. And I remember thinking when I got into this niche that I never wanted to be in a situation where this process may have contributed to, the breakup of a relationship. But now that I've seen a couple couples go through that, maybe it wasn't meant to be. If learning how the other one felt about whether their finances were joint or not, or how they would treat the other one if the relationship came to an end, if that breaks up the relationship, then maybe that is a sign that wasn't that they had a misunderstanding that was going to be a fatal flaw eventually down the road. And maybe it is a good thing that we identified it before things got to a place where it's much messier.
Oh yeah, it just prevented the inevitable, right? Because it's going to happen anyway, or it's just going to be a really messy marriage. Either way, it's not going to be a good thing. Just because, like, even business planning. I mean, I've taught some entrepreneur courses, and there's one guy went all the way through the course and ended up not buying this business he was going to do because he uncovered the issues in that business that he wouldn't otherwise have known had he not gone through the course. And so he just the knowledge actually prevented him from making a 6-figure mistake.
Yeah,
and so I think
exactly.
the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And if that misunderstanding was there, whether it's spoken about or not, it's going to damage the relationship. So, may as well put it out there.
Well, I know people have gone to pre-counseling and before the marriage, and they ended up not getting married too. So I think that could be a blessing because, if you are thinking about marrying someone that has $1 gazillion in debt and you want to be debt-free, and you don't want to take that on, now you're learning this about them if you didn't know it before.
100%. Nobody wants to be surprised, about their spouse's 50 grand they owe to the IRS after they're getting married and they file their joint tax return, and the refund is garnished, or student loan debt, or credit card debt, or even investment approaches, and how you treat money, what your money habits are. So I really look at it as an opportunity to shine a light on what everyone's feelings are, and if that means that some people avoid entering a relationship that was going to be problematic, then maybe that's not necessarily the worst thing.
Yeah, and what about success stories? Because I would imagine, have you heard, I know it's still kind of early days for you, but have you heard couples coming back and thanking you, and are people starting to be, staying together longer?
Yes, absolutely. I've had such great feedback about people saying that they needed this to be an opportunity to get on the same page in terms of their finances. Many couples that come in thinking that we're just going to keep everything separate, and I'm just going to keep things in my name, and they're going to keep things in their name. After they get kind of the education of what it means to be married and how you have to make sacrifices for each other, I think come away saying, we do need to combine some of our finances. We do need a joint account. They look at the relationship in a different way. They recognize that, if they have children, one person or maybe both may be taking a hit to their career in order to support the marriage, or to help raise children, or even moving for the other person's job, and kind of showing people the different scenarios that show how intertwined your finances are when you get married, whether you like it or not. A phrase I like to use is, you can't go Dutch for life, and so kind of helping people merge their finances in a way that is intentional and thoughtful at the beginning of the relationship. A lot of my clients have come back and really thanked me for helping them see, what it means to be married from a financial perspective.
That's awesome. And so you wrote a book. Talk to us about that, the Prenup Prescription.
Yes, I wrote a book. It is called The Prenup Prescription: Meet the Premarital Contract Designed to Save Your Marriage. And in there, I go through, kind of all of the different steps, that we've talked about today, in terms of how modern couples can merge their finances, but avoid a lot of the pitfalls and arguments that we sometimes fall into as married couples. And it's on Amazon, it's on Apple Books, it's everywhere that you can buy it. And so thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, and of course, you can always go to your website, prenups.com. Great domain name. Congratulations on that. And so, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great interview. I mean, definitely some nuggets, whether they get a prenup or not. These are just some takeaways you got to implement in your marriage. Absolutely.
Well, and I love that you're getting the couple talking about things that there could be a lot of taboo things people don't want to talk about. So you're like the third person, and you get them talking about things. I love it. It's great. And
these are all the things we talked about. Yeah, these are all the things we talked about in our counseling when we were going to premarital counseling for those 2 years. These are all the issues. Yeah, you typically don't deal with it till after you get married, because you don't talk about it before. And then, it's so important to talk about these things way ahead of time.
Well, and as your business as well, too.
Yeah, exactly. So, Aaron, thanks so much for coming on. And as you're still listening, I know this has been impactful for you, so please share this with another married entrepreneur. Yes, you're already married, but definitely you can still implement these things into your marriage and have just a thriving marriage as well as a successful business. So go ahead and share this and leave a review for us. We'd really appreciate it. And until next week, God bless. Thank you for listening to the Thriving in Tandem podcast. Please visit our website, marriedentrepreneur.co, for a variety of free resources to help your marriage and business succeed.
And feel free to leave us a review and share this episode with another married entrepreneur. That would mean so much to us.
See you next week.